You're listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com and sound off. And now it's time to drop some knowledge.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast, presented, as always, by Mile High Huddle and 24/7 Sports, powered by Overtime Media. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime. You guys know him and love him as your Denver Broncos reporter for 24/7 Sports. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, we had a couple of small pieces of news hit the wire on Wednesday, which included the Broncos signing a new scout, and then also Emmanuel Sanders talking about how he's feeling, with bouncing back from his Achilles.
I really, and not to go too over the top with this, but I really like this scouting hire, Chad. Francie Jourdain came over from the Texans. Before that, he was with the Patriots. He helped discover Malcolm Butler. He's, as Mike Kliss described him, a very renowned figure in the scouting circles. So they didn't bring back Klein Kubiak, the son of Gary Kubiak, who's with the Vikings now. So to replace him, I think they got a pretty good hire here. In terms of Emmanuel Sanders, he's taking it one day at a time. A lot of Broncos fans were discouraged by the fact that he said he's not ahead of schedule, he's not behind schedule, but he's not getting his hopes up. It's the right way to go about it. He's not setting an artificial deadline to meet. He's taking it truly one day at a time.
Yeah. It's good to see. You know who else cut his teeth with the New England Patriots as a scout? And that is none other than Matt Russell, John Elway's right-hand man in the front office. And there's something to be said for the Patriot way. I mean, from a scouting perspective, the way that they're able to find gems, not only in the undrafted ranks, but late rounds. So any of that intelligence, it's a championship caliber squad. And if you can graft in some of those elements that fit your organization, why the hell not?
Right, and to go along with the fact that Russell, they actually overlapped in New England, Jourdain and Russell, so there's definitely chemistry there. And the Broncos have one of the best scouting front offices, to me, in the NFL, and that just got even better. So it was a great hire by Elway, and it just continues, just a fantastic offseason of personnel moves for the Duke.
So here's what we're going to do today. We're shaking things up a little bit this week, mostly due to the fact that I had some unforeseen traveling that I had to do this week, which has kind of thrown Zack and my schedule off a little bit here as it relates to the podcast. So what we're going to do today is we are going to drop our VIP Mailbag. So instead of Friday, you guys are going to be listening to this on Thursday. And then what you're going to get is on Friday, you're going to get a fresh episode of Building the Broncos. Then Zack and I are going to return and podcast Friday evening when I'm back in town, back at the Mile High Huddle cockpit. We'll drop a fresh episode breaking down everything from the first day of Broncos rookie minicamp that you'll be able to listen to Saturday or at some point over the weekend. So today we're going to jump into the mailbag, but first, let me just remind you guys, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. Really easy to do, and it's the best way to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the show in real time. And then do not forget to leave your creative review and rate the show on iTunes. All right, Zack, it is that time of the week where we take a peek inside the Mile High Mailbag, because we are your football priests, and each and every week we're here to offer you the absolution and answers to your burning Broncos questions. And as always, we love hearing from the Mile High Huddle 24/7 Sports VIP subscribers. And if you're not a VIP, what are you doing? Take some time, go to the website, milehighhuddle.com, click on the green banner, and subscribe. Once you're in the fold, not only do you get access to Zack and myself here on the VIP Mailbag, each and every week we answer every single VIP question in the mailbag. You also get access to 100% of the written content that we publish on the front page, which includes, just for an example, earlier this week, I published a long-form breakdown film room on Juwan Winfrey. Most of you guys have no idea what the Broncos are getting in Juwan Winfrey, and that film room for VIP subscribers begins to scratch the surface on why the Broncos traded up to grab him in the 6th round. So if you haven't become a VIP subscriber, take care of that. You also get access to our insiders only, our staff forum, MHH Insiders. The first question comes from Arctic Bronco, going on 4 months as a VIP subscriber, becoming increasingly more active on the forums. We love the engagement. We love the conversation. Arctic Bronco says, what will you guys talk about for the next couple of months? I'm always interested in the projections for the fringe, the bubble players. I really enjoy the projections you did for the 2018 draft class on Huddle Up Podcast number 255. So that was only, what was it, Zach? That was 2 pods ago where we kind of went through that article I wrote kind of projecting the impact of the 2018 rookie class in year 2. So I'll throw in some ideas here, but what's your answer for what we will be talking about here on the podcast over the next couple of months, which, as everyone knows, it's going to be peppered with some OTAs, but really it's the most dead time on the NFL calendar.
Yeah, I mean, right now, especially before rookie minicamp starts, we have nothing to go on, little news to go on, but we're going to talk about everything. That's what we do. We're going to break down the rosters, the starting lineups, get you ready for the minicamp in June, get you ready for training camp in July. But for right now, it's just projections. It's just understanding how the Broncos roster sits at 90 men right now and what they will do eventually to get it down to 53. For the most part, all we can go on, Chad, is our analysis and what we think will happen until we get to the news on Friday and the rookie minicamp. Thankfully, we have some OTAs, but you're right. It's that dead period right now. We just have to keep Broncos country along with how we think the roster will shape up in a couple months.
But, really, it's this time of year. It's why we're professionals. It's why we get paid to come up with compelling content for our subscribers and for our readers. And trust me, for those of you who have been following the work that myself and the Mile High Huddle guys have been doing for the last 6 seasons, you know that we're never going to be sitting on our hands, even in the dead time. And Zach always has done a great job covering the Denver Broncos. So there's going to be plenty to talk about. To try and get specific for you, Arctic Bronco, as Zach said, we're going to be looking at the depth charts. We're going to be projecting position battles. We're going to be looking at the starting lineup. We're going to be looking at the schedule. There's actually a lot more to analyze than people think. It's just that there's no current events to kind of create a little bit more momentum or urgency. But we'll get to that stuff. So just stand pat. There's going to be a lot to get to, and maybe we'll circle back and do some projections if you really like that episode. Zach, maybe we can circle back and do a podcast episode where we're projecting. We can lay out our starting lineups and then try and project maybe some stats, what we expect to see from the guys.
Oh, I'm down for that for sure. I mean, I know personally I'll be doing updated depth charts, updated starting lineup projections. I'll do 53-man projections. There's so much fun stuff we can do, Chad. But like you said, until we get to the mini camp on Friday, we just have nothing to go on for right now.
Let's get to this question here from Bronco Guy 65, going on 7 months as a VIP subscriber. Bronco Guy says, while I think we all agree that Vic Fangio is a big upgrade to the prior coaching staff, it is still his first time as a head coach. Ultimately, he will be measured on wins and losses. So, what type of success will Fangio need to have to serve out his contract, especially considering all of the roster upgrades over the last year? Appreciate all the great content you guys put out and all the hard work. Thanks, Bronco Guy 65. Appreciate you, brother, for being a VIP and a consistent and loyal listener of the Huddle Up podcast. But, Zach, what's your answer for Bronco Guy?
Well, his first year, like any other new head coach, it's a honeymoon season. So he can go 3-13 this year. It won't matter. So next year, they might have a new quarterback taking over. They'll have the system in place. They'll have the players that Fangio wants and the culture he has instilled. I would say he has a really, really good chance. I personally believe he'll get a second contract in Denver. I see Vic Fangio hanging around for a while. But the measure of success to me is not wins and losses necessarily. It's growth. It's progress. I mean, the Broncos went 9-7 under Gary Kubiak. They didn't make the playoffs. A lot of Broncos fans were disappointed. Then Vance Joseph comes in, they go 5-11 and 6-10. It's all about perspective. It's all about progress. So if they can develop some players, they can point in the right direction. They have their quarterback of the future waiting in the wings. If Fangio can just bump along the development of these players and just show that the arrow is trending upward, he'll go into 2020 with momentum. So I don't see him getting fired anytime soon, and I think he'll be a good boon for this organization for the long haul.
I mean, even if Fangio can lead the Broncos to a plus 500 record, and even if they don't make the playoffs, that'll be such a giant leap in the right direction after 2 consecutive seasons of double-digit losses. That's the type of momentum, even if they miss the playoffs, that I think you could begrudgingly, even as a fan who has nothing but the highest of expectations for your team, can say, you know what, you came in, you elevated a squad, you took what was a improved roster, and indeed you helped elevate the team beyond. Because just to play above 500 by a single game, you'd have to win 3 more than what the Broncos won last season. So if Fangio can do that, I think it'll be a more than successful first season as a head coach. But honestly, we've talked about it on the show before. Even though the schedule looks brutal right now, the presence of Joe Flacco, an improved and upgraded coaching staff and offensive line, plus the work they did in the draft this year, getting Noah Fant. I mean, that's an underrated weapon that the Broncos are going to be able to deploy in 2019. Plus, you start looking at the rookies, as we talked about a couple episodes ago, from 2018, taking that next step forward like Cortland Sutton. Who knows what's in store for a guy like Bradley Chubb, as insanely talented as he is, under a guy like Vic Fangio. You look at Phillip Lindsay once he gets that wrist healthy. You look at Royce Freeman. You look at Deshaun Hamilton and Josie Jewell. I mean, the sky's the limit for these guys, and even Troy Fumagalli. So that's why they're in the NFL. They continue to develop, and you see the biggest jump in their development more often than not, with most positions anyway, from year one to year two. And so Fangio can capture that and shape it toward, stacking some W's in the win column. I think this is a team that, again, I'm on record on this so far this offseason, I think this is a team that's going to surprise some people this year. Now, I'm not willing to go out quite yet. I want to see how things shape up in the preseason. We'll see. I'm not quite willing to go out on a limb saying, this is a wild card team or this is a team that's going to win the AFC West, because it is a tough division. I want to see how they look this summer against outside competition. I want to see how Fangio and Scangarello's schemes look in the practical application of them with this collection of players. But I remain optimistic that this might be one of the dark horse teams that goes from a type of worst to first scenario. It's a possibility that I'm strongly entertaining right now, Zach.
It's true, and let me just add that wins and losses obviously are important, but I want to see how the Broncos compete. I want to see how they play. Will they be sloppy, penalty-prone, killing themselves, being their own worst enemy like we saw under Vance Joseph? Will they truly learn to avoid a death by inches? I want to see that killer instinct. I want to see the Broncos close out games. I want to see the Broncos take Super Bowl contenders and take them down to the wire and beat them, unlike last year when they came close. So, yeah, they might have better win-loss record, but I want to see Fangio put his words into action and make the Broncos a more disciplined team, a smarter team, a more physical team. You put that all together, the win should come naturally.
We still have a few more questions in this mailbag that we're going to dive into, but first, you guys, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, so next question here comes from Burke2105, going on 2 months as a VIP subscriber, also a guy that has become increasingly more active in the forums. Loving the conversation there from you, Burke. Burke says, I know the bridges might be burned in Denver, so this is probably unlikely, but would bringing Shane Ray back as a pass-rushing depth piece make sense?
No.
It was reported that the Bears were interested in trading for him, this being before the Khalil Mack trade. So Fangio must have seen something that he liked. It's a new coaching regime, and Fangio could get something more out of Ray. Now, Zach, off the cuff, you said no. Explain your thought process there.
I just don't think he adds anything to the table. I just don't think if the Broncos wanted him back, they would have signed him by now. What does he add that Jeff Holland, Justin Hollins, or Malik Reed can't offer? He had his time in Denver. He was a former first-round bust. He didn't work out here. He had a bad attitude last year. He needed to change his scenery. He's not coming back, and nor should he. That's just my feelings on it.
You landed on the most important thing here. I mean, we can talk about the fact that he, after having a solid second year in 2016, he failed to live up to his first-round expectations. I mean, he was basically a first-round bust. Maybe just this side of a first-round bust. Maybe I won't quite go so far as calling him a first-round bust, but he's almost there. I mean, he's on the line. But the biggest thing is his attitude, and he really turned off a lot of people within the organization last year. He did not take kindly to the way the team handled his injury. He did not take kindly to seeing the team take Bradley Chubb with the 5th overall pick last year and then losing any kind of, qualitative or quantitative playing time to a rookie. And he festered. And I'm not going to say that I've heard anything about him being any kind of a cancer, but that's what you risk when you have a player like that just sitting in the locker room, feeling sorry for himself and rubbing off on other players like Asua Cravens and guys like that. So you got to excise that type of player, get him out of the organization. And as much potential, Zach, as Shane Ray had when the Broncos took him in the first round, and especially those first 2 years, he did show some potential. I mean, he had, in 2 seasons, he exceeded, I think it was 12 or 13 sacks. He was showing promise, but you can't make the club from the tub. And that wrist injury just derailed him, and then from there, he was just never in the right headspace to be a true contributor on this defense. And last year, what did he have? 1 sack? And It was a cleanup sack. I can picture the sack right now.
He was never the same Shane Ray after that wrist injury. He just never came back from it, and he wasn't a good overall player. And I will easily say he's a first-round bust. He's not good against the run. He's not good setting the edge. He's inconsistent getting to the quarterback. To me, he just offers nothing, and I couldn't be happier that he's no longer with the Broncos.
Trivia question. Can you remember the last quarterback Shane Ray sacked?
I recall the sack last year. I cannot remember the game it was in.
It was Joe Flacco, week 3.
Oh, nice. That's interesting.
And it was a free run at the quarterback, basically. It wasn't because he beat his man, with a nifty pass rush move.
And Flacco's so mobile, too.
Right. So Shane Ray, listen, happy trails. Enjoy that Kansas City Chiefs tattoo. And we'll catch you on the flip-flop. The Broncos, hey, they've already moved on because not only are they expecting some good things from Jeff Holland, but they drafted Justin Hollins in the 5th round, and they acquired Dakota Watson. So Shaquille Barrett's gone. If there was any one of those two guys the team would have strongly considered bringing back, it would have been Barrett, not Ray.
Yep. I was a much bigger fan of Shaq Barrett than Shane Ray.
Let's move on here to the next question from Bronco Gig 95, going on 27 months as a VIP subscriber. He says, since it's the dead zone of the offseason and not much to talk about, maybe we can convince Zach that the trade for Flacco is elite, especially since he's still in his prime.
The trade is elite. They only gave up a 4th-round pick for their starting quarterback. So, yeah, the trade in itself is elite. I'm just not sure the player is elite, but that's pretty funny. Maybe I'll come around. I don't know. Chad, you know how I feel about this. I want to see him on the field when the bullets start flying. I couldn't care less what he does in a non-padded simulation. I would come around. I would be fair with it, but it's going to take some convincing. That's all.
He's trying to settle in to his new environs. He's got merchandise, Mile High Joe. There's some swag out there for you to go out and buy. And you guys know, I'm on record. I'm a lot more optimistic about the Flacco acquisition and his prospects as a starter here than Zach is. And the biggest reason why is he's returning to a system that he thrived in. It was his best statistical season in 2014. Similar that he's going to be running here in Denver under Rich Scangarello. The Broncos went out and improved the offensive line. And as Zach iterated on that previous question, he's not the most mobile quarterback, but what he does have is, made of stone. Okay, he'll stand tall in the pocket. He'll take hits. He'll take the pressure in order to deliver the football. And so, he's got the arm. We've had guests on like Benjamin Albright who talked about the biggest difference between a guy like Flacco and Case Keenum, for example. Besides their resumes are completely different, but as a player, the biggest difference is that Joe Flacco forces the opposing defense because of his arm strength to defend every blade of grass. And so if the Broncos, if all of their, maneuverings and additions pay off and he's afforded the time, he has a chance to have one of these rebound type of seasons. And again, I don't underestimate the emotional component of having been christened the Ravens franchise quarterback, and when he won that Super Bowl in 2012, thinking he's on his way to the Hall of Fame, and he gets that gargantuan contract, and he started for that organization for 10 years, and to be so quickly supplanted by a first-round quarterback, he's got a chip, and I think that's going to play a role in him, how he plays in 2019, for the better or for worse. I personally think, Zach, it's going to be for the better.
I will say this. I'll say this. The Broncos did a really, really nice job this offseason stacking the cupboard around Joe Flacco, giving all his weapons a boost, the offensive line, the tight end in the first round, bringing back all his receivers. If, like I said on yesterday's pod, if the Broncos were smart, they will hide Joe Flacco. They will lean on the defense, lean on the running game, and use his arm where it's applicable. So if they can do that, if they can do those things, they can win. And he should be a big upgrade on Case Keenum. I'm just not ready to go all in just yet until some games start getting underway.
Yeah, no doubt about it. They've done a much better job. And even just the additions on the offensive line, and even just the addition of Noah Fant, should allow Joe Flacco a lot more leeway to be productive as a starter. And one thing I can tell you about Joe Flacco is, he might not be that guy, Zach, that's going to light up the Star Wars numbers like a Peyton Manning. Don't even start thinking down that road. But what he is a quarterback who's going to play within his lane. He's going to play within himself. And if the game is within striking distance in the fourth quarter late, my money's on Joe Flacco to get that W. And it's kind of funny, and don't misinterpret this because they're two totally different players, but John Elway was never a player, with a couple of exceptions, even for his time, that dominated the box score statistically. I mean, he had a 16-year career, and so those numbers add up, and when he retired, he was one of the most productive quarterbacks of all time from a statistical perspective. But he was never a guy just lighting it up like Dan Marino's season, for example, where he set that single-season touchdown record all those years ago, 48, I believe it was, back in 84, I want to say. That was never John Elway. But what he was able to do is, he built his legend. Obviously he won those 2 Super Bowls, but he really built his legend as a player long before that as a guy who was money in the clutch. And that's something I think Joe Flacco brings to the table. And on top of everything else we've already discussed with the additions, that's one thing that really encourages me because, Zach, we saw last year in those close games when the chips were down, that was most often when Case Keenum ended up playing his worst.
Yeah, I even said it last year on some pod last year. The Broncos don't need a Tom Brady. It'd be nice, but they don't need a Tom Brady. They don't need an all-pro. They don't need an Aaron Rodgers. They just need competency. And they thought they were getting it last year in Keenum, but what we saw was he was still they were winning in spite of him, not because of him. Hopefully with Flacco, they can win because of him. If they can do that, this team will turn a corner fast.
All right, last question here comes from JC3762, 17 months as a VIP subscriber. JC says, how are players such as Joe Jones, Brendan Langley, Will Parks, Elijah Wilkinson, Jeff Holland, and Jake Butt perceived within the organization? Are there any front office guys that are betting the farm for these guys? Is there anybody at the top trying to get these players out of the organization, is JC's question. Zach, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's take it on an individual basis here. Joe Jones, to me, is good inside linebacker depth. He's not going to start. Langley is a burner type who's converting. He's not really in the mix. Parks could start. Wilkinson, to me, stands out because apparently Leary's moving back to a right guard per Garrett Bowles, so they want maybe Wilkinson at left guard, or they don't know how the configuration is, but he'll be in the mix somewhere. Jeff Holland's going to get playing time, and Jake Butt, to me, whatever you get out of him after 3 ACL tears is a bonus. So in the front office, I'm sure Mike Munchak likes Wilkinson. I'm sure Donatel and Fangio like Will Parks. Every coach has its favorite. We saw last year with Parks and Vance Joseph, but it's an individual basis, and these players all have to prove their worth. None of them, for the most part, maybe for Parks and Holland and Wilkinson, none of them are guaranteed a spot on the 53. All of them have to compete this summer, so we'll have to see how it shakes out.
Two guys that jump out to me from that list that I know have guys rooting for him in the front office are Brendan Langley and Jake Butt. And it's no coincidence that one of them represents a former premium round draft pick, and the other, Jake Butt, even though he was taken in the 5th round, he was viewed as a premium caliber player. And the Broncos, let me put it this way, their faith in Jake Butt as you know, it was how can I put this? Their faith in Jake Butt remained high even after they nursed him through his redshirt rookie season. And you could tell that by how much playing time he was getting out of the gates last season. But suffering that third ACL in his football career forced him to face some facts. And that's why you saw them re-sign Jeff Heuerman. That's why you saw him go in the 1st round after Noah Fant. And that was after we've been told that they were willing and ready to take TJ Hawkinson at pick 10 if he slipped. But he ended up going 2 picks before to Detroit. So they've had to face facts. They've had to come to terms with the reality that even though the upside is there for Jake Butt, Zach, you know, he's got to prove it that he can stay healthy and stay on the field. And I think still to this point, though, if, like Jake Butt talked about on that radio interview that we've talked about on the pod and I wrote about, I think it was end of March, when the when the surgeon went in to repair his knee this last time, they noticed that the notches that the tendon actually connects to in the knee were remarkably narrow, like unusually narrow. And because of that, as an athlete, when he was running, it was putting unusual pressure and torque and friction on his ligament. And it's one of the reasons why he's been so prone to that injury. Well, this particular surgeon, Zach, what he did is he kind of scoped out those notches to allow the ligament, once they've healed, more room to kind of wiggle around without coming up against bone and cartilage. And so Jake Butt, based on his advice from his surgeon and his doctors, is of the opinion that's going to solve his problems. That's going to be the difference maker for him in terms of this time being different. Now, we won't, we'll only know that as it comes out in the wash, but I remain optimistic, but I'm with the Broncos on this, Zach. At this point, you've got to move forward based on who you can count on. At this point, you can't count on Jake Butt. However, if healthy, he automatically is the number 2 tight end in terms of talent and ability on this roster.
Yeah, but if healthy is the big qualifier there. I just think if the Broncos had any hopes for Jake Butt, they would not have re-signed Hireman and took a tight end in the first round. So I know for a fact Elway loved getting Butt in the 5th round. You're talking about a top 3 round talent there, but he just hasn't been able to stay on the field. And like you said, you can't make the club in the tub. You just can't do it. So I would love Butt to contribute. I think he has some inline and all-around tight end ability. I just am not holding my breath. I would feel much more comfortable actually with Jeff Hireman in that role, number 2 behind Noah Fant. And
that's definitely how it's going to start this year. The season's going to start with the top 2 guys being Fant and Hireman. But depending on Jake Butt's prognosis and how quickly he can return, once healthy or if healthy, it will not take him long to supplant Jeff Hireman on the depth chart. Now, another guy I mentioned in Brendan Langley, we're talking about a guy here who wanted to go back to receiver, right? After being drafted as a very raw cornerback who the Broncos really got stoked on after seeing him play at the Senior Bowl. They got stoked on him. They drafted him, and he wanted to go back to wide receiver. And so John Elway in the front office, they acquiesced. They accommodated and made that decision without even running it by Vic Fangio first. And this is after the Vic Fangio hire was made. And when Fangio was the first time he was asked about Langley being moved to wide receiver, it was news to him. He didn't even know. Right. He's like, I'll have to talk to John about that. Well, sounds like they came to some kind of an understanding because Langley's hitting camp this year as a wideout. But that just kind of shows you, Zach, unproven bust-level third-round picks aren't granted that kind of, faith and willingness from a front office lest they have some kind of believers. And it might simply be, Zach, just a self-preservation type thing from John Elway trying to salvage at all costs a third-round pick.
That's exactly what it is to me. If he was a 7th, 6th-round pick, he would be off the roster by now. And what was Langley's justification for moving from cornerback, Chad? He actually said, I don't like moving backwards. That's why he's no longer playing cornerback for the Broncos, your 3rd-round draft pick. To me, that says it all. I would not pin all my hopes on Brendan Langley. I'd be surprised if he's on the roster come September.
Well, hey, guys, that's going to do it for this episode of the Huddle Up Podcast. We are going to have a lot to talk about on Saturday's show for you. Okay, we're going to record it Friday evening. Maybe we'll publish it early for you, too. But we're going to have a ton to break down on that episode, so stay with us. And again, you're going to have a Building the Broncos episode, deep dive episode for you, waiting bright and early Friday morning. So look forward and stay tuned for that. Make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. Don't forget to leave your creative reviews and 5-star rating on iTunes. You can find my partner Zack Kelberman on Twitter at Kelberman247. Myself at Chad N. Jensen. Be good. Broncos football is coming back soon, starting on Friday with rookie minicamp. For Zack Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. We'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.